No sound, no sound.
Hotep, my brothers and my sisters, as I greet you in the power of the Most High Creator. We'd like to thank all of you for tuning in to our broadcast today. We are looking forward to a good time that we can share with one another. My moderator is having difficulty with his sound right now. However, I will go forward because what we came to hear was the instructions from the Creator. And, you know, it's really challenging, you know, to know that most 9 out of 10 individuals is not interested in this information, when this information is probably the most important information that they need to be tuned into. People today are not researching or seeking a higher understanding of their consciousness. I met a young fellow the other day, and I said to the young brother, I said, Abara Ghani, my brother, I'm getting. You might want to mute your mic. I said about organic, and the brother didn't understand that word, that concept. He was very challenged by what I said. He said, "What's that? What do you mean?" Now, this cat was probably 20 years old or better. When you get to the age of 20, you should know something about your ancestry. He didn't know about Agani was a welcoming call of our ancestors. I wonder if I would have had said Assalamu alaikum, would he had understood what I was saying at that point, to where he would say, well, hey, I'm not a Muslim. Well, Jesus wasn't either. But when Jesus came into the room, Jesus would say, Assalamu alaikum, because he would always say, peace be unto you, which Assalamu alaikum means. So he spoke Aramaic, and but we always try to connect phrases, concepts with a race or religion, when we have to understand that information is paramount. That is the most poignant thing out of everything that we deal with on this planet, and that's information. In order for an individual to move forward in their ascension, in their evolution, they have to begin with knowing and understanding the Creator. Not a God, because in the scriptures have always interpreted Genesis chapter 1 as those Hebrew people being monotheistic, to where the scripture does not teach that the Hebrew people were monotheistic according to their translation. Their translation promotes polytheism to mean many gods. We see references of that throughout the scriptures, especially in the book of Genesis. If you read the book of Genesis, you know the story. The book of Genesis, this is where we get our word genetics from. It deals with the beginning of a civilization, a group of individuals. It's not the beginning of creation. It's the beginning maybe of their creation, their viewpoint of coming into being. Okay, but it is not the information that that creation is founded on. When you read Genesis chapter 1, the word God is the Hebrew word El, E-L. That's the word God. But the word God in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That word there is Elohim, is not El. So Elohim is defined as many gods. Okay? So we know that the interpretation and translation from the Hebrew tries to suggest that they're talking about a mono God, a single God, when in essence is representing multiple gods, which would make the Hebrew people henotheistic, which means that they are poly in their theology. Because Joshua warned them, choose you this day who you going to serve. So every individual could choose the God that they were going to serve. Okay, that was the religion of the Hebrew people, the early Hebrew people, before they became the Israelites. They were the Hebrew people, which understood and which recognized themselves with multiple gods. But yet, as time goes forward and interpretations and translations is passed down, the church took on the identity of the Jewish people, okay, the Jews, to whereas the Jewish belief system is kind of skewed with the Hebrews, because the Hebrews were henotheistic, to where the Jews, according to the book of Exodus, became monotheistic as they began to identify with one God who is known as Jehovah. Okay, who is known as Jehovah. But in their belief, it became more patriotic in their belief, because the matriarch, the female, was not recognized in that culture. Okay, so now you have an imbalance in humanity. You have an imbalance in humanity. We see it even on today as women are raising their children, and there's no masculine energy in the structure of the child. And so the child grows and develops without balance. And this is why you have so many individuals who are confused with their identity, their sexual identity. And so that's both male and female are confused with their sexual identity, because there is an imbalance in their energy. Because we are cyclical, energetic beings. Okay, we're not human beings. Okay, we have been termed as human beings. However, we are cyclical beings, radiating energies, because we come from the Creator, which is spirit. Now, spirit takes on an identity, okay? Spirit will take on an identity because throughout time, mankind has evolved from one species to another species, okay? You have your Homo habilis, you have your Neanderthals, you have your Homo sapiens, you have your Homo sapiens. So there's an evolution of development as it pertains to human beings. However, in those human beings, there was spirit functioning in them. Okay, there was spirit functioning in them. And if you're functioning in the right balance, with the right balance, you can receive the results of the Creator, okay, in that time period, okay, in that time period, because we live in periods of time, okay, periods of time. If you recall, I taught on the fact that we were making a transition out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, okay? Now, we would follow that energy based on the information that has been passed down to us, which is out of alignment with the constellations, with the stars, okay, the planets, okay. Um, our calendar runs from January to December. And so therefore, depending on what month you were born in, if you were born in June, they say you're a Gemini. If you were born in October, they say you're a Libra. Now, Gemini is supposed to be the 6th month, according to our calendar that we've been living by. However, when you go and you look at the original astrological signs, the constellations lines up different, because Libra would be in the 6th month, because time back then started in the spring, March. Okay, you had the first month was March and not January. And so when you are following the Gregorian calendar, which is January to December, you find yourself out of balance, because you're thinking that it's Libra season, when in all essence it's not Libra season. The constellations are not projecting the energy of the Librans, just as they're not projecting the constellation of the Gemini in the 6 months according to the Gregorian calendar. So we are dysfunctional creatures. We are dysfunctional creatures, but yet the Creator is providing for us energy that brings us back into balance based on our receptivity of our subconscious. So if we begin to research the topic, the subject of energy, both masculine and feminine energy, we have to look at what has been written, okay, what we have been taught, and then we have to be willing to make adjustments based on that information, okay? Now, last week, I kind of surveyed the 4 different perspectives of creation. I proposed that there are 4 different perspectives of creation, and each one of them gives us a different perspective of how it all began. So we can take something from every one of them and develop our own comprehension, because the information is only going to work for you. If you're utilizing inerrant information, you're going to get that type of result. However, if you're functioning with correct information, then your outcomes are going to be different. So we talked about the Samaritan perspective. We talked about the African perspective, which is the Kemites. We talked about the indigenous perspective. That's the Indians, okay, that were giving you their understanding of creation. And then we talked about the metaphysical. We just kind of overviewed it last week. So let me quickly go through the Samaritan, because we've been talking about the Samaritan belief system, and kind of parallel it with the African Kemites belief system, because that the Africans, the Kemites, are probably the oldest people on the planet. Okay, those descendants of the Kemites were probably the oldest people on the planet. So we can embrace the information that is told in regards to what they have passed down and a lot of their information is passed down by the elders. Okay, they didn't necessarily write a lot of stuff down. It's folklore. It's passed down from generation to generation to generation. Okay, so it's important to understand that. And plus, a lot of that information of the Kemites is in your Akashic records. Okay, we have an Akashic record. Okay, inner cabinet, if I may, of information stored already in our DNA. And so when you hear information that is relevant to creation or human development or spiritual development, now that pulls out of that chamber, okay? That information that sparks that area of your trunk, which you are storing your information in, it comes forward and validate truth, okay? Because remember, the scripture says that it's the word that don't come back void. It ain't got nothing to do with who said it. It's got to do with the word. The word will make the difference. The power is in the word. Okay? The power is in the word. Now let's look at the Samaritans quickly. The Mesopotamian lands. Long before the Hebrew text, the Samaritans told Ninti, whose name means both Lady of the Rib and Lady of Life, because the Hebrews talks about that the woman was taken from the rib of the man as if she was secondary, okay? And so they recognize her Lady of the Rib and Lady of Life, okay? In the story, she is a goddess of birth and healing. Her connection to the rib is about giving life rather than punishment or sin, okay? Remember, in Genesis chapter 3, the Hebrew says that mankind was punished because of the sin of the woman, which diminished the woman's importance, and they identify the function that went on in the garden, so-called garden at that time, as being an act of sin, when there was no such thing as sin at that particular time, according to the culture of the Hebrew people, okay? Because sin was not identified or defined until Moses went up on the mountain, according to the Hebrew people, and that Jehovah gave him the commandments, which points out and identify now sin. Okay. Now, before that, remember the Kemites lived by Ma'at, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this narrative could follow the woman as a healer who shapes humanity's destiny with compassion and skill. Okay. So it wasn't what transpired in Genesis chapter 3 had nothing to do with punishment, because the event that took place in Genesis chapter 3, in my opinion, was respectful and with authority, because the serpent that's supposed to have spoke with the woman, okay, here you got a human and an animal communicating according to that story. Okay, so when you look at that writing, that narrative, you got to ask yourself, is this a literal event or is this a metaphor? So if you conclude that it's a metaphor, then you gotta quit believing about a serpent and a snake. Okay, talking with a woman. You got to now, you know what a woman is, a human woman is. Now you got to try to identify what is the metaphor of the snake or the serpent in Genesis chapter 3 in this event, because this was pivotal. Okay, this was pivotal for history, because it changes everything about history. Okay, so when you dismiss the fact that this woman wasn't talking to a literal serpent or a literal snake, okay, that image, snake or serpent, is really a title. A title. So if we conclude that there was a conversation that took place between two beings, two human beings, then we have to now consider the information that was given to her. Okay? Did not God say you cannot eat from the tree? Okay, so that whole conversation took place. No, God knows that if you eat, you'll become as one of us. Who is one of us? One of the Elohims. So I would conclude that the woman was communicating with one of the Elohims, okay, which could be easily identified as Jehovah, okay, because it says God thus know that if you eat from the tree, you become as one of us. Us. Let us make a man in our image. So we know that there's multiple authorities or gods that is in this context of Genesis chapter 3, chapter 2, chapter 1. Okay? For God does know that if you eat from those trees, you will become as one of us, knowing the difference between good and evil. Now, why wouldn't the Creator not want you to know the difference between good and evil? Okay? Why would the Creator want to prohibit you from the information of good and evil? So you gotta begin to unpack the stories that you have been compelled to believe. Okay, because when you believe something, you act like it, and if you are acting out of character, then your results are going to be predicated on your activity. Okay, let's say that you decide to become a homosexual, and so therefore you begin to act as if you're female. So in essence, you are acting out of character to both male and female. Both male and female is recognizing that, number one, we know you're a guy, okay? We know you're a guy, but yet you're acting as a female, which means that you are acting out of character. And so the outcomes that you will desire is not going to be the results of what the female would experience versus what you experience. So anytime you are acting out of context or acting out of character based on the information that you are functioning with, that you are believing, okay, because a lot of flaming homosexuals believe that there was a mistake made in their lives. They supposed to be a female, boom, 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 all of that. I'm not here to argue that. I think they have the right to choose that if they choose to. However, the results are going to be different. The results are going to be different. So all I'm saying here is that we have to understand that if we accept this concept of fracture or sin based on Genesis chapter 3, it's going to change, okay, our outcomes, our manifestations, because we're not functioning with the right information. Okay, you got to be functioning with the right information. Okay, part two of this, in older Samaritan myths, the first human being, male and female, were created together by the goddess Ninhursag. Ninhursag was known as the female Anunnaki who came down from the heavens above. That's what Anunnaki means. Now, what she was, she had to be a being that resembled humans. However, the power that she possessed, the power that her and her two brothers possess, coming down from the heavens, okay? Coming down from the heavens. Her brother Enlil and her brother Enki, the three of them came down from the heavens and dwelled here on the earth. Now, one might say, I just can't believe that. I can't believe that something came down from heaven and now they living here on earth and that sort of. I can't believe that. Yeah, but you believe Book of Revelations chapter 12 when John says, "I saw New Jerusalem coming down from heaven." Okay, you believe that Jesus came down from heaven and Jesus returned to heaven. So why can't you believe that some other entity, did the same thing? Did the same thing. So, these were powers, okay, that the Samaritans believed in, that this individual, this goddess, was the beginning of their development, okay, their civilized development, okay. There was no Adam first, okay. Both are shaped from clay in divine breath as partners from the start, according to Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. Okay. The 1:26 say, "Let us make a man in our image and our likeness, and let them have rulership over the earth." Okay. Let them have rulership over the earth. I think it was something else I wanted to add to that. Let me see if I can pull up my Bible right quick. Let's see. Pulling up my Bible. Come on, Logos. But, here we go. Here we go. Gen 1:27.
Master, perhaps we can't believe it because that's not what's been taught to us.
Exactly.
The other stuff has been drilled into our minds.
And that's why we have to make a decision for ourselves, not for the group. Okay. And this is what happened in church, is that we go along to get along instead of instead of realizing you're there to evolve. You're there to learn truth. But that's what church is not promoting, okay, the teachings of truth. They're promoting fellowship, integration, and that sort of thing. And so you have to be willing. It's okay to go if you want to go, but understand that you are there to get your truth, not y'all's truth, your truth. And if the truth is questionable, then you got to be willing to not to continue to follow that truth. Okay? So 127 says, so God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Okay? That's what the Hebrews present, but yet they still say later in chapter 2 that the female was created secondary to the male. Okay, again, we have to look at these narratives, these stories, as being literal. Either it's a literal story that really happened, or if it's metaphysical, or is more metaphors that are presented, and now you got to fill in the blank. You got to figure out what goes into that blank. Okay, so that's important. So you got to be willing to make some adjustment to your theology so that your theology will be different. Your theology will be different. Let me give you the definition of theology. Come on. Theology. No, that ain't what I said. Okay. Guess I'm spelling it wrong. I'm going to have to give you that definition because I don't have the right spelling. But it's a matter of the way you function. Okay. Now let's talk about the African or the ancient Egyptians. See, the Egyptians were in all actuality Africans. They didn't become Egypt. Okay, the Egyptians that you're familiar with until thousands of years later. Okay, we talking ancient Egyptian, not new Egyptian. Okay, in Kemet, the first woman could be likened to Iset. Okay, Isis is the Greek word for Aset. Aset is the Kemetic word for the first mother. Okay, this goddess is tied to creation, to love, beauty, and cosmic order, which is Ma'at. That is what the Africans believed in, living in Ma'at. You know, I have not stolen. I have not committed murder. I have not bear false witness against my brother. I have not. It's a confession of your functionality, living Ma'at. It's not that you were commanded not to do something, because if you're commanded not to do something, you're not acting in accordance to will, okay, free will. You're doing what you're doing just in case or to keep from being disciplined. You know, a lot of people go to church or believe in a God just in case. I tell people all the time, there's no destiny called heaven or no destiny called hell. So you can get that out. And they argue back and forth with me, but they can't defend their position, okay? Because I shared with them that you are a cyclical being of energy. You're constantly going in a circle. Your energy never ceases to exist. You know, I said to a brother, he said, "How you doing?" I said, "Man, I am great. How about yourself?" He said, I'm fair to middling." I said, "Well, ain't you in charge of that?" He said, "Nah, I'm not in charge of that." I said, "Well, wasn't you in charge of getting up this morning?" "No, I wasn't in charge of that either." "Well," he said, "I'm just glad to be here at this age." I said, "Didn't you do something to get to that age?" See, they want to give credit to something that's outside of them instead of something that's in them. See, it is like Jesus says, greater is he that is in me. I would say greater is it that is in me than it that is in the world, or he that's in the world. It's the inner being that liveth. Okay. That is who you truly are. You are the inner being of yourself. You are not this image that we see with our physical eyes, because our physical eyes are not really seeing the image. Our physical eyes is seeing interpretation from other senses of our spiritual realm. See, your eyes only see what the rest of your senses tell it. Okay, your nose only smell what your other senses tell it. Okay, it describes it, and you come up with what you see or what you smell or what you taste, because all of your senses are connected to your image or your manifestation. Okay. So that young lady that you're dating, she might look like, damn it, I bite you. But not in your mind, because your image is telling you something different. Okay. So your information or your manifestation is produced from the inside, but you think that everything that you experience is already out here. No, you dictate that. You dictate that by your participation in the system. We live in a system, and because we participate in multiple ways, I'm not just saying that because we participate in one or two or three ways. I'm saying there's multiple connections that causes us to believe that we are living in a already manifested world, to where you only believe that because of all of the nuances that connects you to that idea. Okay. Now you can begin to process your way out of the idea. That takes work, meditation. It takes going deep within and being able to communicate with your inner being and understand that what I'm seeing is in the third dimension, and so therefore I want to ascend to the fifth dimension where things look different. I function different, and that's so I want to opt out of this three-dimensional. You can do that. Okay. Uh, I'm not encouraging nobody to or don't. Okay. But I'm just saying that this probably is our experience because we are spiritual beings. But just because we're spiritual beings doesn't mean that we are not participating in this system. And we are. See, because you got to understand, from the point of birth, you began to be programmed from the point of birth, from your mama's womb, from the doctor pulling you out, exposing you to the bright lights and spanking your butt to bring you to life and all that kind of stuff. You began to be programmed from that point on. You go to nursery school, and nursery school teaches you how to do. You go to kindergarten, they teaches you how to do. You go to first grade, they teaches you how to regurgitate what they're giving you, and that's so you're being programmed. Okay. So to be able to deprogram yourself at your age that you are now, there's a lot of unpacking that you would have to do to try to deprogram yourself from this system to whereas you don't see it no more. You don't see what you see. Okay. So it's deep. It's deep. And this is what I'm saying is that we lived, our ancestors lived according to a standard and not according to a system. Okay. It was a standard of living called Mayat. Okay. Came down from Aset. Okay. This was the feminine energy balanced with her husband, Osiris, which produced the outcome called Heru. Okay. The Greeks call him Horus. Okay. Okay. So this woman, okay, Aset, she wouldn't be blamed for a fall from grace, but celebrated as the bridge between spirit and matter. One who teaches humans how to live in harmony with the divine laws. I keep constantly talk about the utilization of the laws. You can talk to somebody until you blue in the face, and they still don't get the idea of the utilization of law. When you use the law intentionally, okay, you use law intentionally, now you're controlling outcomes because you're intentionally using the law. Okay. Now people can say, yeah, I understand. I accept that. But accepting it and functioning within it is two different things. Okay. Two different things. You can tell the story as the one who first received the Ka, divine life force. Okay. That's the Ka, and learn to channel it to the physical world. This is what I'm saying, coming from the inner man, the inner person. You know, we talk about the Ka and the Ba. Okay, the inner force is the Ka, and the personality and characteristics of outward functioning becomes the Ba. Okay, in certain creation accounts, the first emanations are often paired. Okay, a male and female force appearing simultaneously. Shu and Toughnut, okay, Gab and Newt. This is what the Africans believe, that these powers come in pairs. Okay, there is no singular in the creator. Okay, man first. Okay, then the woman comes. No, the woman is the cosmic womb from which all forms of energy makes her role logically first, because you can't get here without coming through that that womb. You got to come through the womb in order to be able to get into this dimension. Okay. And so it's important to understand that it's impossible for a male to be considered the first frequency. The female had to be the first frequency. Now first means simultaneously. When you're dealing with it from a metaphysical perspective, simultaneously, because we are both male and female. Okay, I'm a male, but I'm both male and female. I'm androgynous. You know, a woman is androgynous. You know, and it ain't until our gestational process defines our sex. Okay, but yet I don't lose my feminine energy just because I become a male. The female don't lose her masculinity just because she becomes a female. Okay. In the indigenous area, okay, speaking of Indians, they recognize this energy as the Earth Mother. Many Native American traditions tell of the Sky Woman who fell from the heavens carrying seeds, planting the first garden on Earth. See, that kind of lines up with Nehusak, who came from the heavens. She doesn't bring sin, but abundance, food, and medicine. She's a healer. Your version could show her descending not in shame, but in sacred mission, on a sacred mission to weave spirit into soil and birth the human experience. Okay. They had a perspective that we are connected with nature. Okay. With nature. When an African would cut down a tree, they would plant one. Okay, put it back. Okay, they respect nature. In many First Nations and African cosmologies, the first human is female, the Earth Mother or the Sky Woman. The male figure often appears later, sometimes created by or for the first woman to balance creation. Here's the metaphysical universal land. Eve becomes a symbolic figure representing the awakening of consciousness. Okay. Your feminine energy is awakened. Okay. The fruit is not a forbidden trap, but the choice to know. Okay. She took of the fruit and she ate. It was a choice to know. And this is why you got to make a decision to want to know. Okay. And don't be afraid to go by yourself. Okay. Don't be afraid to go by yourself. You don't need nobody to help you be dumb or stupid or smart. You make that decision for you. Okay. So she made the choice to know, to expand beyond instinct into self-awareness.
Master, are you using the chart?
Yeah, I'm using the chart. I'm
We
using.
don't see it.
You don't see it?
No.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I thought y'all was following my stuff.
There it is.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I shared my screen. Okay, let me get that off. Yeah, there we go. Okay, the fruit is not a forbidden trap, but the choice to know, to expand beyond instinct into self-awareness. In this telling, she's not the villain. She's the first seeker of truth, the one who dares to step beyond safe ignorance into the adventure of knowing both light and shadow. Okay. You can't be afraid because the information is who the creator is. Your spirit will rightly divide the word of truth. So you don't have to be worried about nobody leading you unless you following them. You know, now you can walk with somebody and learn yourself, but if you follow an individual and receive everything that they say as gospel, then you might get into some trouble. So you can follow, but do your own research. Do your own research. Moderator, I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing my screen. The Adam first, Eve second idea is largely a specific Hebrew framing. Okay. In other traditions, they're co-created, or a woman precedes men, or the first woman is entirely separate from the Genesis story of Eve. the woman as first principle. Okay. The woman as first principle. Many metaphysical systems, especially African, Eastern, and esoteric traditions, see the feminine principle as the original source. The divine feminine is the matriarch or the matrix, the void, the womb, the field of potential from which all forms arises. See, we all come from the womb. It's triple dark up in there. We are being developed. We are given everything that we need in that womb. When you come forward, there's no mistake about who you are or what you are when you come out of the womb, because you have been divinely developed in the womb. Okay? The matrix of the female. Okay? That's what you have to understand. So this system out here is not in control of you, okay, but it's controlling you. Okay? And it's only controlling you because you give it permission. This is how cults are developed. Okay, you give them permission to control you. They tell you what to believe and what not to believe. Okay, if the minorities in these United States decide that they're no longer going to follow the system of the United States government, then this whole system will collapse. It will collapse. If the minorities in these United States come to understand that there is two laws. There is the United States, and then there is the United States of America. There's two governments that's ruling in this environment. But we don't understand that. We don't understand that one government was developed because the other one fell in the 1700s. Okay, in the 1700s, this is why you got a lot of your credit cards and that sort of thing come from Delaware, because the laws are different, because that is where the Incorporation of America was established in Delaware. So there's a lot of political issues that empowers the system. However, the system can't be the system without the people. The people have to buy into the system. Okay. And if you buy into the system continues to perpetuate, continues to go. But when you stop, okay, I watched a movie the other day called Alice. I think it was called Alice, and it was a true story back in the 1970s. And you might watch this on Netflix. That these white slave owners throughout history, they still had their plantation back in the deep woods, and the black folks that was on their plantations never knew nothing about the Emancipation Proclamation, a world outside of that plantation. It wasn't until the sister Alice ran away because of some tragedy that happened on the plantation. I think it's an excellent movie for you to watch, because it will teach you about how a system can function in a system. Okay. And how if you rebel from the system and run into and get into a different system as she did, then the old system will be destroyed. So go to Netflix and watch that movie, Alice. Excellent movie, good movie. I won't tell you a whole lot about it, but if you really wanted to see systemic functionality. That's a good movie to watch because you wouldn't believe it. Like I said, it was a true story. This happened in the 1970s. Okay. I was 18, 19 years old in the 1970s. And these people were still living on a plantation, not knowing that there was a world that existed outside of them. Because when she saw a vehicle, when she saw restaurants, when she saw books and all these different things, it was like she was from another planet. That's what happened when you get hypnotized and you fall up under the control. Okay. So I'm going to stop there on slide 78. I'll start on slide 79 next week. But we thank you all for tuning in this evening. We look forward to sharing on next week. Let me put some bye-bye music on.